All right, what we're going to do today is we're going to write some more code, and I'm going to go ahead and use Dreamweaver again. Reminder, you can use Notepad if you want to. But the things we're going to talk about today, I'm just going to go to the design view so I can actually type some of these things out in case you're taking notes. The two things we're going to work on today is we're going to learn what an alert is. And what that does is just pops up a window or pops up a little message box with some feedback you can give to a user. And we're also going to talk about the event handlers, and these are things that you can tie to your code that something happens and causes your code to execute. So let's look at the alert first. The alert is a method, and it is a method of the window. It's not a method of the document. So technically speaking, window.alert is the format you're going to use, and then inside the parentheses is a method of the method. You're going to have the message that you want to show in the alert box here. And so the alert comes up. It's just like I said, a little pop-up window we'll see in a minute with your message and an OK button. So like I said, it's to give a little bit of feedback back to the person. Now from previous lessons we learned that the window dot is understood in JavaScript, and so what we can do actually is just issue the command alert and in parentheses have whatever message we want to put there. So we're going to be using this today just to give some feedback to people when we do our program. What we're really going to focus on today are what are called the event handlers. And the event handlers sit there and wait for something to happen, and when that action occurs, be it from the page loading, unloading, something changing, or the user doing something, then that allows you to call or to execute some JavaScript based on that event happening. And so what I'm going to do real quick before we go and write some code is I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the more common event handlers that you'll use. So you'll have onClick is probably the most common one. And this occurs when somebody clicks something. A lot of times you'll put a button on a page and something will happen when they click the button, but it applies to anything. You can have onClick on a div tag, onClick on an image tag, anything like that. So the next probably most common one is going to be the on mouse over and the on mouse out event. And this is kind of a hover action where the user puts the mouse over something, code executes, they take their mouse away from that object, either it returns to normal or more code executes. So somebody moving their mouse over and moving it out. Let's see, some things that you'll see on forms are the events on focus. When somebody moves into a field, so if you have a text box and somebody enters the field, you can have code execute on that event. On blur is when somebody leaves a field, so you could potentially, if you maybe only had one field that you were validating, you could check as they left that field to make sure that they had filled it in correctly and write some code for that. On change is after they've changed the contents of a field but haven't left it yet. On submit is used a lot when you're doing form validation. This is when they actually click the submit button. You can have it run some JavaScript before it actually does the action of the form, which can be very useful. On load and on unload are events that have to do with the page itself loading. So when the page loads, you can have code execute. A lot of times if you want to check to see what browser they're using, or you want to just welcome to the page right when it loads, something like that. Or you can actually do some stuff as they're leaving the page too. Some not as commonly used ones have to do with the key presses. You can have on key down, on key up, and on key press. And those allow you to tie certain keys to certain actions. Again, sometimes used in accessibility performance, but not as common as the ones that we mentioned. And so the way these things work is they act like attributes most of the time on HTML tags. So you would add an on click to the HTML that's inserting the button, or add the on mouse over to the code that is inserting an image. So it's going to look like our style, our inline style tags. It's going to look like our other HTML attributes that we've learned along the way. And so we're going to write very simple ones today that just have one line of code. And so we might have when somebody mouses over, an alert comes up, or the picture changes or something like that. And so what we're going to do is just do a couple of examples here to show you what some of these things look like. So let me go ahead and erase all of this so I can have a little bit of room to work. And let's just start simple. I'm going to go into the code view, and we're going to go up into the head section of the document, and I'm going to open up a script tag and go ahead and get our JavaScript set up. And so we're going to be a very basic one. I'm going to show you how the alert works, and we're going to go ahead and use the onLoad event. And what we're going to do is we're going to say when the page loads, let's have a pop-up window that says welcome. Now this is probably something that would annoy your viewer or your user, and I wouldn't recommend doing it in this case, but again, it's just to demonstrate what we're going to do. So we're going to say, actually, let's just add this to the body tag. Like I said before, we're going to add those event handlers to the body tag. So I'm going to come down here to body, and I'm going to say when the body loads, just like a regular attribute, it's going to be equal to something surrounded by double quotes. And I'm going to say that I want to issue an alert, and I want it to say welcome. Now before we go on, I want to show you something that will drive you crazy after a while. And this is another syntax thing that I didn't show in the slideshow earlier because it's a little bit more easier to explain once you understood the code. We have a problem here with our double quotes. So we have onLoad, and that's going to be equal to something, and we always say that it's going to be surrounded by double quotes. So I really need to have closing double quotes there. So our onLoad event is this business right here surrounded by double quotes. But because we're also using double quotes here for our literal value of welcome, we're going to run into some problems because JavaScript likes to pair these things up. So it sees the first double quotes opening up, and then it goes along and it sees this instead of a new opening set of double quotes. What we have now is an opening set of double or a closing set of double quotes. And so it looks at this and says, that's not a command. That doesn't make sense. There's a big old syntax error there, so I'm going to bonk and not actually say welcome when the page loads. So what we have to do when we have these conflicting sets of quotes is we alternate them with single quotes and double quotes. So this one's going to be a double quote just like we're used to, but when we come in here and want to use double quotes again, we have to remember to change that to single quotes. So pair up those single quotes around the word welcome, and then pair up the double quotes around the onClick event itself. And so what this script does is the body will load when it hits this line of code. That event is triggered, and it causes this action to occur. So let's take a look at that in the browser. I need to go ahead and save that. And when our page loads, we should see our first occurrence of our alert box. And like I said, the message appears here with just an OK button there. When I click that, if there were more content on the page, then it would go ahead and load up there. So that's an example of the onLoad, and again, using the alert. I'm going to take that out so it doesn't annoy us for the rest of the lesson when we go to view something. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the design view. If you're in Notepad, you can go ahead and start typing in your HTML. But I'm going to go into the design view, and I'm going to go up to the insert menu, and I'm going to insert an image. Let's see, we have pictures of Yosemite, it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and put in my alt text, and let's go ahead and click right next to that, and I'm going to insert another image. of Yosemite, also Yosemite Lake, we'll say. And so we have these two images here. Again, I'm going to switch back to the code view. I could have easily typed that into Notepad if I wanted to, but you can see how it actually saved me a little bit of time. And what we're going to do now is we're going to add some on-click events to the image just to show you that it can be done. So here in the first image, which is Yosemite Smaller 1, I'm going to go towards the end of that tag. I'm going to say on-click, and I'm going to set that equal to an alert, and I'm going to give some information about what this picture is. Remember those single quotes because we've already opened up a double quote. And I'm going to say this is a small waterfall in Yosemite. Single quote. Close my parentheses. Semicolon. Close my double quotes that go with the on-click event. And I'm going to do the same thing for the second one. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say the on-click event is going to be equal to double quotes an alert. Open the parentheses. Since we've already used our double quotes, we have to use our single quotes saying this is a lake in Yosemite. Close the single quote, close the parentheses, put your semicolon in, and close your double quotes. So what this is going to allow us to do now is add an on-click event. So when this loads, actually nothing is going to happen except for the two images will appear, and the code will only be activated by the user clicking on the image. So let's take a peek at that. Preview in Firefox. Click yes. We wait for it to load up. We should see our two pictures. Again, like I said, we could sit here all day. That code would never run until we actually click on the image. It tells us it's a small waterfall in Yosemite. We click on the other image and it gives us the other link, the other message that we put. So again, just another example of how to use a different event handler. Let's go ahead and insert some buttons. I'm going to go back to the design view and I'm going to insert, and I'm going to come down to form, and I'm going to tell it that I want to enter a button. I'm going to name it red, and it wants to add a form tag. Let it, we don't really need it, but it's not going to hurt anything either. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in 3 times just so I don't have to go back through the menu system. And I need to change some properties. Again, if you're writing the code, you would just write out the properties. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the first button, and I'm going to come down to the properties area here in Dreamweaver, and I'm going to, well, I haven't clicked on it yet. There we go. There are the properties for the button. The value says submit. I want to change that to red. And very important if you're using Dreamweaver, I don't want this to be a submit button. I want it to be a button that I'm going to tie some code to. So I need to change that to none. And I'm going to do that for all 3 buttons. I'm going to click the second button. I'm going to come down here and have the button say yellow, and I'm going to change that to a button type of none. And finally, I'm going to click the last one, the value or what appears on the button change to blue, and the button type is going to be none. And so what that does, if we go back to our code, it goes ahead and puts in our form for us. We don't really need an action on this because we're not going to submit this form. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tie some code to these different buttons using the on-click button, the on-click event. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here with a little bit of text right above the form, and we're going to give the instructions of click a button to change the background color. So again, we're going to wait for the user to do something, and then once they do something, we're going to write a little bit of code. So on each of these buttons, what I'm going to do is again come to the end of the HTML where the input is. So input type equals button. When we did our forms before, we had input type equals submit. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say when somebody clicks on that using the onClick event, I want you to change a property of the page. I want you to change the document.bg color, and I want you to set it equal to a value. Now if I'm going to give a named value, if I'm going to write out the word red here, I need to use those single quotes, or I can do my hexadecimal, my pound FF0000. But I'm going to go ahead and use my single quote, tell it I want it to change it to red. And this is where it looks a little weird. So I close my single quote, and right after that I'm going to change or close my double quote. If you want to put the semicolon in, you can, if it makes it easier for you to see the difference. And so what we're going to do here is when they click on it, we're going to change the background color on the fly to the button that they've selected. And we're going to do that for each button. And I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy that code, assuming it's right. We might have to do a little bit of debugging. I'm going to paste it there, and I'm going to paste it there, and instead of changing it to red, this time I'm going to change it to yellow, and down here I'm going to change it to blue. So now when they click on the button that says red, yellow, or blue, it'll change it to the corresponding color background. So let's take a look at it and see if we need to do a little bit of debugging. I'm going to preview it in Firefox. After I save it, it should come up. And we have our buttons, so we click red and we see the background change. We click yellow and we click blue. Again, I'm not sure that it's something that you would use very often on a page, but it does show you an example of, again, how to use the event handler. And in this case, we're changing a property of the page to something different based on what the user used. So let's try one more, and this is one that's going to use the history. And the history of the window actually is what's keeping track of what you have surfed to. And so if you use the browser buttons in Internet Explorer or Chrome, whatever you're using, the back button and the forward button are actually going through your history file that's tied to the browser window. And what we can do is we can use a method of this to actually move around and kind of emulate these. Now, again, most of the time people are going to use their back buttons, forward buttons up in the browser. But let's say that you are having somebody page through maybe some training where it's very linear and you want them to go forward and maybe go backwards. You can actually build those buttons into your page and have it emulate the backwards and forwards buttons. So let me show you how to do those. I'm going to go to the design page again. I'm going to go ahead and give myself some space, and I'm going to insert two more buttons. It's going to ask me to have names for them, so I'm going to say next. And sure, why not? Let's have the form tag even though we're not going to use it. So clicking on the submit button, I'm going to change this to previous, and I want to change that away from a submit button to just a regular button. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to insert, I'm going to come down to form, and I'm going to choose button. This one's going to be next. I'm going to click OK, and I go through the same changes there. I click the button. I want it to say next, and it needs to be a none button. So just to show you again one more example, I'm going to go back to the code, and I'm going to use the on click on both of these buttons. And so when I use on click, what we're going to do is we're going to use the history property. The history object of the window. So we would normally type window.history, but because that window is not really required, we can just easily start out with history. And one of the methods that is tied to the history object is the go method, and it tells it to go up or down in the list of history from where you are currently. So if you want to go back one, inside the parentheses of the method, you're going to tell it to go -1 space in the current history file. Notice that's not in parentheses because it is actually a numeric value. It's going back 1 space. And if you want it to go forward, then it's going to look very similar to that. You're going to have on click is going to be equal to history.go. This time you're going to go forward 1 space, so you have a +1. Now this one's a little hard to test because when we open this up, we don't really have a history, so I'm going to have to poke around a little bit. Let's go ahead and add a link that might help us out. I'm going to say ahref equals http://www.tarleton.edu. When we click it, we go to Tarleton, and let's do a BR there, and let's put in another link equals, well, if I could type, that would help, wouldn't it? http://www.google.com, Google, and close that link as well. And let's just go ahead and put in another BR. All right, the reason I put those in is because I have to click on a couple of things to establish this history to show you how they work. So let's go ahead and preview this, and I'm going to do something kind of weird when we preview it. Instead of clicking on the buttons, well, now I'm actually going to have to just show you the buttons. So if I click previous, it doesn't work because this is the first page that we've looked in and there's nothing in the history 1 spot back. So if I go to Tarleton, I have an extra W there, of course, so I'm glad I had a second link. Let's go to Google. So I go to Google, and when I go back to Google, there's now something in my history file. Now it is in the next because we went to Google, which was next, and then we went back to this page. So if we click next, notice that it actually goes to Google. Let me try to see if, let me copy this, see if we can force it to do a previous button. So let's go to www.tarleton.edu. We go to Tarleton, and then we go back to our page that we just did, and we hit the previous button, and it goes back 1 space in our history. So again, I'm not saying that this is the most useful or the most commonly used thing. Where it really can be useful is if you're doing a training exercise, you have some content, you're ready for them to go to the next screen and to page through something but still give them the ability to back out. So just to review what we covered today in this lesson is we did learn the alert method. It allows us to give a little bit of feedback to the user based on what they've done. And what we've done really is tied it to a few of those different event handlers, the on-click here, we did the on-click here, and when in our previous one we actually had the on-load. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next lesson where we will be learning more about functions and variables.